Hello, today we will be solving this GATE 2023 question from Life Sciences, question number 96. And I am Shurasri Pal. I am a Prime Minister's Research Fellow of IIT Kharagpur. This question states, match the immunological statements in column 1 with appropriate descriptions from column 2. Now, in the column 1, the terms are active acquired immunity, first line of defense, passive natural immunity, second line of defense. Column 2, uh, complement proteins and interferons, direct contact with pathogens that enter the body, surface barriers, and antibodies that pass through the placenta. And these are the options among which we have to choose. For more information on this topic of immunity and the lines of defense, you can follow this NPTEL course, Immunology, and the YouTube link of this active and passive immunity lecture is also given here. Now, coming back to the question is mentioning about the different types of immunity, active acquired immunity, passive natural immunity. So let's discuss about these types of immunity first. Now, there are obviously two distinct types of immunity. One is the innate immunity, another is the acquired immunity. Now, innate immunity is something that we are born with, so that is why it's called innate immunity. Like for example, the like our skin, the organs, the tissues and cells of the immune system, which we are born with, and the immunological mechanisms with which we are born. That is actually the innate immunity. Whereas the acquired immunity is the immunity that develops during our lifetime. Acquired immunity is of two types, active immunity and passive immunity. Active immunity is the type of immunity which develops in response to an infection or a vaccination. Whereas passive immunity is something which develops after we receive antibodies from a person or from somewhere else. So we will discuss about more about active and passive immunity. So active immunity can again be natural or artificial. So as I mentioned, that active immunity is the immunity which develops in response to an infection, or it can be vaccination. So when the immunity develops in response to an infection, a natural infection, that is called the natural active immunity. So here, what happens, suppose there is a pathogen that attacks the human body, and when it attacks the human body, the pathogen can enter the human body and it can cause an infection, and the body will generate an immune response against this pathogen. So that immune response is the natural active immunity of the person, which is generated by the antibodies which are developed in to tackle the infection. Antibodies which can neutralize the infection or kill the pathogen. So that is active natural immunity. Coming to the artificial immunity, active artificial immunity. So this is the type of immunity which is developed in response to a vaccination. So we know that in case of a vaccination, we are injected with an inactivated or killed strain of a virus, which does not cause the disease in our body, but uh, due to the injection of the particular viral strain in our body can recognize the epitopes on the virus, and then our body can produce antibodies in response to that. Even though this does not cause any disease, but it protects us from further infections with the same virus. Or it can be any other type of pathogen also. So, for example, suppose there is these polio virus, or suppose there is this pox virus. So if we take a vaccine against any of these viral infections, so what will happen usually, we inject an inactivated vaccine, which is an inactivated strain of the virus, which can be killed, which can be attenuated. There are different other types of vaccines as well. And once that is injected in our body, it does not cause any disease in the body, but our immune system recognizes the virus. Now, therefore, in case of any subsequent infection with the same type of virus, with the same strain of virus, our body recognizes that, yes, I have encountered this before, and I know exactly the type of antibody that I need to produce to tackle this particular virus. So therefore, it will produce this particular antibody response very quickly on a second exposure to that particular virus. And that is how our body gets rid of the viral infection very quickly on subsequent exposures to the virus. So that is how vaccine works, and that is actually the active artificial immunity. Now, coming to passive immunity is something which we receive from someone or somewhere else. So, how do we receive immunity from someone? A very natural process is to receive this from our mothers. So, antibodies that the newborns receive from their mothers through breast milk. So this is a type of the passive immunity, passive natural immunity. The newborns who feed on the breast milk, that is why it is very important to um, feed the newborns with breast milk, because the breast milk is usually um, rich in antibodies. The colostrum, the very initial breast milk, which is yellow in color, that is rich in antibodies, and this provides uh, direct protection to the newborn. So, the difference between active and passive immunity is that in passive immunity, we directly receive the antibodies and we do not have to produce, the body does not have to produce it. And that is beneficial for the newborns because in the newborns, the the immune system is not very active, is not fully differentiated yet. So the newborns need these antibodies for quick protection against any pathogen because they are very susceptible to any pathogens that might be in the environment. So the newborns need these antibodies which come from the breast milk of the mothers. So this is how a passive immunity works, or a passive natural immunity works. Whereas, if we talk about passive artificial immunity, this is when we receive antibodies as a treatment from a medicine or as a treatment. So, why do we receive antibodies as a treatment? Obviously, because we need a quick response to any particular um, pathogen that we might have encountered. And this is the case seen in the snake venom treatment. So if we are bitten with a snake and we need to act very quickly to save the person, and we need to take the person immediately to the hospital, and the doctors there uh, treat the patient with antivenom. So what is antivenom? Antivenom is are the antibodies that act against the snake venom. So snake venom, which is injected into our body by the snake bite, can be now neutralized by these antibodies that come in the antivenom. So how are these antibodies produced? These antibodies are actually produced in horse or some other um, uh, animals. So there in these animals, the snake venom is injected, and the antibodies are generated by that animal against the snake venom. And this serum of these animals where the snake venom was injected, that this serum is collected, and this serum contains those antivenom antibodies. So these antivenom antibodies are injected into the person who has been bitten by a snake. So therefore, these antivenom antibodies will quickly try to neutralize the snake venom and will quickly save the person. So that is also a type of passive immunity, but this is artificial because we are receiving these antibodies as a part of a treatment. So these are the different types of immunity that we have discussed, active and passive. Now, if we come back to the question, um, so the first one, the first term was active acquired immunity. And as we have discussed, that active acquired immunity is developed when we have direct contact with the pathogens that enter the body. And the body's own immune system generates those antibodies to kill the pathogen. So T can be matched with 2. Now let's look at the options. Um, P, if we match it with 2, there is one option, that is option A, where P is matched with 2. In the rest of the options, P is not matched with 2. So we can say that the option A is correct, but let's match the other terms also. Okay, coming to passive natural immunity here, which is option R. Passive natural immunity can be matched with the antibodies that pass through the placenta. So, as I mentioned, that newborns receive the antibodies from the breast milk. Also, uh, there are antibodies that can cross the placenta. These antibodies that cross the placenta from the mother, it reaches to the fetus and it protects the fetus from any pathogens. So, this is also a type of passive immunity because the fetus is directly receiving the antibodies from the mother. So, R can be matched with 4. So let's see in the option A, which we have already discussed, R is matched with option 4. So P is 2 and R is 4. These two we have already matched. And now we need to match the rest of the two, but we are kind of sure that it will be option A. Now let's match the other two options as well. Now, the other two terms are the first line of defense and the second line of defense. Now, let's discuss about these lines of defense a little bit. So, we have two types of immunity, the innate and the adaptive immunity. And there are these lines of defenses, the first line of defense, the second line of defense, and the third line of defense in our body. So, line of defense, as we understand that these are the defense mechanisms of the body that um, helps us to protect ourselves from any kind of pathogen or any kind of um, um foreign organisms that might disturb uh, our body. Okay, so the first line of defense includes skin, mucous membranes, and the secretions of skin and mucous membranes. So that is the first barrier that the microorganisms, any kind of pathogens, have to face. And if this first line of defense is not breached, the pathogens cannot enter our body. So skin, as we know that our whole body is covered by skin, so it's a very good first line of defense where most of the microorganisms cannot breach. So they cannot enter through the skin. So therefore, um, it cannot enter our body. And also the mucous membranes that line the, our the like for example, our mouth is covered with mucous membrane, the gut is covered with mucous membranes. So these are also the first line of defense that helps that prevents the entry of any pathogen. And also the skin of the secretions of the skin and mucous membrane. The second line of defense is actually formed by the phagocyte leukocytes, antimicrobial proteins, inflammatory response, and fever. So, suppose there is a wound on our skin. So, if there is a wound on our skin, we know that any pathogen can uh, breach into that wound because the skin is not intact and the skin cannot protect. The first line of defense does not work. So, therefore, the pathogen can enter through that wound. And if the pathogen enters through that wound, there are other mechanisms that can protect our body from that pathogen attack. So those will be the leukocytes, mainly the neutrophils, which are the first responders in case of any breach of any pathogen. So these neutrophils, they move to the site of infection very, very fast, and they try to phagocytose the pathogen. Then coming to the antimicrobial proteins, which are called the complement proteins also. So they also help to neutralize the antigen, and this inflammatory response is also generated, and we also experience fever. So fever is a mechanism of the body where the high temperature of the body actually helps the pathogens to not replicate inside our body. So these are the first and the second line of defense, thus all gives us the innate immunity. Whereas the adaptive immune arm is only activated when our innate immune responses do not work. So, if the innate immune responses cannot completely clear the pathogen from our body, so then comes the adaptive arm of immunity is activated. And this adaptive arm of the immunity is the third line of defense, which is composed of the antibodies, the lymphocytes, and the memory cells. So, the T and B cell mediated immunity. And we know that the T cells, uh, they can be cytotoxic T cells, they can be helper T cells. So the cytotoxic T cells directly kill the virus infected cells. The helper T cells help the B cells to produce antibodies. And we also know these antibodies can directly kill the pathogen, or it can directly neutralize the toxins. So that is how the third line of defense works, and that is how our body finally gets rid of any foreign pathogen. So this is the first and the second and the third line of defense that we discussed. Now, coming to the question again, the first line of defense, so we can match it with the surface barriers. We know, for example, skin. The first line of defense can be matched with surface barrier. So Q is 3, correct? And S, second line of defense, are the complement proteins and the interferons. The interferons are the molecules which help in inflammatory response. So, as we have discussed, that inflammatory response is also part of the second line of defense. So, S can be matched with 1. So, therefore, our first option, that is option A, is true, is all of them are correctly matched. P is 2. Active acquired immunity is direct contact with the pathogens. First line of defense are the surface barriers. Passive natural immunity are the antibodies that pass through the placenta. And the second line of defense are the complement proteins and the interferons. So, our correct option here is A. So, that's all. Thank you.